Welcome to Fertility Friendly Food, the podcast. My name is Stephanie Vlakis and I'm an expert certified fertility dietitian and nutritionist and founder of The Dietologist, a multiple award-winning virtual fertility and pregnancy nutrition clinic serving thousands from around the world, and of course, the host of this pod, Fertility Friendly Food. This podcast is dedicated to all things health and nutrition in the world of fertility, reproductive health, and pregnancy. Each week, I bring you practical snack-sized episodes to help improve your lifestyle on your trying to conceive journey, alongside guest expert interviews to help inspire you to learn and grow whilst you grow your family. Welcome back to another episode of Fertility Friendly Food. I'm Steph, your host, expert fertility dietitian and nutritionist and founder of The Dietologist. And we are back with another installment in our PCOS mini-series for the month of September, which is, of course, PCOS Awareness Month. And this is a super common topic that comes up with conversations with our clients on social media and also in our conversations with our medical and interdisciplinary colleagues, which is all about weight management and PCOS. So before we get into this topic with our very own senior team dietitian, Candice Crellin, accredited practicing dietitian and nutritionist with extensive experience in PCOS management and a key area of her interest here in our clinic, I did want to let you know that this conversation may be triggering for those of you who are working on your relationship with food or your body, or you're struggling with disordered eating or eating disorders. Of course, as you probably already know, we do take a very balanced approach to how we discuss weight and body weight when it comes to PCOS. However, we understand it is a sensitive topic and also want to protect you. So if this is something that you are not ready to hear right now or at all, give this episode a miss. There are plenty of other episodes for you to tune into, including in this mini-series all about PCOS that do not discuss body weight. Now, without any further ado, let's get into today's podcast episode with Candice. Welcome back to the podcast, Candice, for our PCOS mini-series. We are excited to have you back, and today's episode is all about a super popular topic that we get in clinic and online and see a lot of discourse about, especially in the medical community, is about weight loss and PCOS. So welcome back, Candice.
Thank you. Very excited to be here. And yeah, it's definitely a great topic. It can be a bit of a controversial one at times, but it's a big challenge area for our PCOS clients. So it's really important to talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think before we get into the nitty-gritty details, I've talked a fair bit about weight management and our stance on it in previous episodes. So I will link it more in relation to fertility than PCOS specifically, but I will just leave that linked in the show notes below, because if you are just crossing us for the first time, I think it is important and relevant context as well. So yeah, Candice, tell us a bit about the relationship between body weight and PCOS.
Yeah, so I guess we know that a lot of our clients, when they come to us, they do find weight loss more difficult than other people or people who don't have PCOS. And there's certainly an increased risk of weight gain in this population group. So what we tend to see is that there tends to be a lot more weight gained, particularly around the midsection for women with PCOS. So they carry this extra body fat a little bit differently to what we see in the typical female pattern, which is normally kind of the hips, thighs area is where we tend to accumulate a bit more of our body fat, generally speaking. And we know that we get this body fat gain around the midsection due to the hormonal disturbance that comes with PCOS. So it's really related to that insulin resistance, which I know we've talked about in the past, and also to those high androgen levels that we see with PCOS. So, we have this kind of underlying hormonal issue that creates this problem with it being a lot easier for women with PCOS to gain weight and then it being much more difficult for them to actually lose that weight.
Yes, absolutely. And also, the prevalence of people with a higher body weight in PCOS is just much higher than the general population. And whether, like, it's hard to know if it's chicken or an egg situation, right? But our understanding mostly is like that the symptoms and the mechanisms that drive PCOS are contributing to rapid weight gain. And that's something that we commonly hear from our clients as well prior to their diagnosis is a period of rapid weight gain. And that's not universally true. It's a syndrome, so everybody's symptoms are unique, but it's common to hear that kind of story. Whereas I feel sometimes the discourse and conversation is that, quote unquote, just lose the weight and the PCOS will improve, which is often the kind of line of advice that gets spat out to a lot of people with PCOS by sometimes well-meaning healthcare professionals. But it can feel extremely frustrating and demoralizing to hear that over and over again when you are trying your best to eat well and exercise. And increasingly, we're seeing people following more and more restrictive diets to manage their PCOS in a bid to lose weight and finding their efforts futile. And then hearing that advice, it can really just be an absolute soul destroying oversimplification of managing PCOS. So, yeah, totally. It's totally removed from like the reality of the situation, especially if you don't understand what someone's trying already or has tried already. To those people who have been given that advice of, weight management is the fix for PCOS in some sense, what's your advice about that? What do you say to people who may have been given that advice before?
Yeah, look, like most women in general, we have this level of kind of body dissatisfaction, and most people would like to lose a few kilos if you're chatting to them in the street type thing. It's a very cultural kind of thing. But we know with PCOS, we're told that if we lose 5 to 10% of our body weight, it can improve our insulin resistance, it can improve our androgens, it can help to restore ovulation. But I guess the problem is it's not as simple as like the energy in, energy out equation that we use for weight loss. So I guess what I do with a lot of my clients is just kind of reassure them that, it is so much harder for them to actually lose weight. They've got to put in, 2-3 times as much effort as somebody who, doesn't have PCOS or the underlying insulin resistance. And so they're working a lot harder. They're getting a lot less results. And sometimes they're copying it from their doctors, like why haven't they lost weight and that type of thing, and can often put them off coming to see a dietitian because they think that that's what they're going to get from us as well. And so I always like to make sure when we're working with our clients that we're not taking this particularly weight focused approach. And while women might want to lose weight, I think that's not the primary focus of what we are going to do, because if we want to lose weight, we need to deal with the underlying mechanisms that are causing that weight to be an issue. And so if we take the focus off the number on the scales, can we start to look at, well, what are the things that are driving insulin resistance? And we're going to focus our dietary management on improving the metabolic abnormalities like the insulin and the androgens, so that weight loss then becomes easier. And I think what I often see is weight loss just becomes a side effect of what we're doing rather than it being the actual focus of eat this and this and this to lose weight. And I think that's what's much more successful. It's much more relevant. And I think it resonates with our clients a lot better because they have been trying, and they often come to us on these highly restrictive diets, and we have a little bit of underlying disordered eating because of all of the things that they've tried as well. And so we want to manage all of these aspects and work with them to get them where they actually really want to go.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to be discussing eating disorders and disordered eating in a future episode of this PCOS mini series. So definitely stay tuned for that one. But absolutely. And I also think painting anything as some kind of cure-all for a complex, incurable, essentially syndrome. However, we can improve the symptoms significantly. So you're essentially asymptomatic in some cases. You have a regular cycle, you're not experiencing the high androgens, insulin resistance is better managed. But you can't just then stop doing all the things that got you to that point. So sustainability becomes a huge aspect of what we talk about with our clients, which we delved into a lot in the previous episode. We talked about which dietary approach is best for PCOS. But like you mentioned, disordered eating and eating disorders in general are, something that's always on a dietitian's mind. And I think we are uniquely placed as dietitians to put our little spidey senses out to start to have a bit of a sense of how people talk about food, their relationship with food, the relationship with their body and exercise more uniquely than probably most other members of the care team. And we, like at the Dietologist, like the first thing, we don't talk about weight first up. And in some cases, we don't ever end up talking about weight, because some people may come to us and say, actually, you know what, I'm so kind of traumatized about talking about my weight loss for so many years. I just don't want to focus on it. I just want to focus on health promoting behaviors, and I have a challenging relationship with food. And that's so fine too, because you can absolutely work on managing your PCOS whilst respecting a healthy relationship with food. You can also have a healthy relationship with food and lose weight with PCOS. You can also have a poor relationship with food and need to gain weight with PCOS. And there's so much along that spectrum. So, I think sometimes there is an overgeneralization that all people with PCOS have a weight issue and have a desire to lose weight. And that may not necessarily always be true. And we need to respect people's unique goals and, of course, their relationship with food. So for those who are contemplating, this is a new approach, seeing weight management as a side effect of other health promoting behaviors, what would be your key focuses or your key tidbits of advice to those listening who are thinking, yeah, that resonates with me. Where do I get started on that?
Yeah, so I think, first of all, we need to have a look at an individual's actual goals are. So what is it that you want to achieve and why? And I think that is super important, because sometimes like we'd like to lose weight, but what's the reason behind that? And sometimes it's about improving your self-esteem and improving your confidence, or being able to feel more comfortable, going to the gym to do your workout. And sometimes it's just about having more energy, being able to get up out of bed, in the morning and not have sort of that high level of fatigue that can come with PCOS as well. There's lots of different symptoms with PCOS. So it's looking at what are the things that a person is actually going to benefit from. And I think like we need to talk to people about, some of the things that they might be experiencing. And so I guess we know women with PCOS, they might, experience things like a lot of appetite dysregulation. So we see people that report they just feel hungry all the time. So they're always ravenous. They can't feel when they're full. They don't know when they're hungry. And so their ability to regulate what they're eating naturally, it's quite altered. And so they don't know when to eat. They don't know when to stop. And so we might need to put some factors in place to help with that. And we know that they actually have some altered levels of the gut hormones that tell us that they're hungry or full. So it all comes back to kind of getting that hormone balance underway too. And I spoke about sort of the energy in, energy out equation doesn't work with this group. So I guess traditional approaches to weight loss say that, you need to be burning off more fuel than what you are putting in each day. But we know women with PCOS, they often have a lower metabolic rate than somebody without PCOS. And so they might be burning 20 or 30% less energy than what we anticipate they would. And so, there's only so far you calories back down. So people will often say, I'm eating less and less and less, but I'm not losing any weight. And that can be because of that altered metabolic rate as well. So as I said before, we need to address those underlying principles, such as the insulin resistance. We need to look at things like their thyroid hormone levels. So sometimes hypothyroidism is really common, or that subclinical hypothyroidism is really common. We need to address sort of the disordered eating patterns and address those issues with appetite regulation. So I think what we address as our first port of call with PCOS is looking at the insulin resistance, because that's the most common kind of factor that most women will have. altogether. And that is about looking at their carbohydrate intake in particular. So we know when we eat carbohydrate foods, they break down into glucose. Glucose is released into our bloodstream, and then insulin is also released as our glucose levels go up. And so with insulin, we know that we're releasing more insulin than should be required. So we have this insulin excess in the bloodstream, and that is what's the insulin is there to pick the glucose up and move it out of the blood and into places like your body's cells, like your muscles, where it's used for energy. But then we're left with this excess insulin in the blood. And that insulin is essentially, this is like a very kind of basic biochemistry, like not the proper, I guess, terminology of it all. The high insulin levels, they tell our body to store that glucose, but then they also tell our body to keep storing body fat as well. And so it makes it really challenging to lose body fat when you've got high insulin levels. So we need to look at our carbohydrate foods, because that's what makes our blood glucose levels go up, and that's what's going to help to initiate that insulin response and help to control that, so that we can start to get that hormone fluctuation under control. And I think with carbohydrates, the amount that every individual needs is different. And so, I think we talked last week about the low carb and the keto diets, and we don't tend to use those in PCOS in particular, because those carbohydrates are still essential for our body. And I guess anecdotally, what I find is if people are eating less carbohydrate, when they go back to eating carbohydrate, that insulin resistance can worsen. And then that exacerbates the problem. People put weight back on a lot faster, and we get into that vicious cycle. So we need to really individualize the amount of carbohydrate for each person. And that's probably a key component of what we're doing with a lot of our clients.
Absolutely. I wanted to jump into the conversation and actually talk about why so often there is a hyper focus on weight and PCOS, particularly from the medical community, and still even in the guidelines, we see it quite a lot, that lose 5 to 10% of your body weight, and, PCOS symptoms will improve. And obviously, to make it into a clinical guideline, there's got to be evidence to support, like a good amount of evidence to support that. But I wanted to highlight what the actual mechanism of that is, because we see 5 to 10% thrown around so much in conversation, but with no context at all. And also no timeline, like 5 to 10% in what time frame? In a year? What does that look like for people? Most people have really warped expectations of what achievable weight loss actually really looks like. Often, particularly in the fertility world, we're getting timelines of weeks and months for, unhealthy amount of weight loss, right? So that's not appropriate. But it's really not about weight itself. It's actually about body fat, which is probably the more accurate way to talk about it, which is body fat itself those adipocytes, which are the fat cells, actually secrete small amounts of estrogen in and of themselves. And so when we've already got the mechanism of PCOS working in, kind of caught in a loop, which is causing those follicles to kind of almost try and produce a dominant follicle to ovulate, but not quite. And then you're getting stuck in these irregular cycles, is because of this estrogen feedback loop being too high. And so those extra adipocytes contributing even small amounts of serum estrogen when it's already struggling can kind of keep it caught in loop, which is why sometimes when you do get some weight loss, even a small amount, you can just quickly circuit break that and get the opportunity to get on top of it again. And so that's often why we're seeing a lot of discussion from the medical community about 5 to 10%, but it's actually 5 to 10% with a focus on body fat loss, not losing muscle or water weight like you would by going keto and losing 5 kilos in the first week, which is all just water. It's not about your relationship between you and the earth in terms of your pull, the gravity that's pulling you down. It's actually really about the composition and body fat composition more so than anything else. And of course, there's a whole bunch of people that will have a regular cycle with PCOS and fulfill the other criteria. So again, this is all extremely unique. But I also wanted to ask you, Candice, about what the dangers are of weight loss, that some of these weight loss efforts that we're seeing of people with PCOS can be dangerous at different levels, physiologically and also psychologically. Can you step us through some of the consequences of people that are attempting, big weight loss kind of goals, maybe unsupervised or without the help of a professional, or using extreme measures, and what some of the potential downsides of that are?
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's lots of components but I think probably one that comes to mind that we see quite a bit with PCOS is potentially you cut your calorie intake down too low, and then you actually induce hypothalamic amenorrhea, which is where you essentially lose your period because you're not eating enough calories. And so I guess your reproductive function, I guess it's part of your general health, but it's not as important as keeping your heart beating, as keeping your lungs breathing. And so when you are not eating enough energy or calories in your diet, but your productive system is able to shut down so that the energy is able to go to the more important bodily functions. And so I guess it's a little bit like your body thinks that you're starving. And so we lose that menstruation. And then that can often get confused with PCOS having irregular ovulation being one of kind of the key components. And so I guess that's one of the things we're always screening for when we're looking at what people are eating. If we've got people that are reporting very low energy intakes, we think, all right, is it still the PCOS at play here, or is it this hypothalamic amenorrhea? And I guess that comes with a whole host of other health consequences as well. It can affect your bone mineral density and all those types of things. Cardiac health comes into play there as well. So there's lots of different risk factors if we're not eating. And that's one that I do see with PCOS quite often. Another thing is, I know we've highlighted a lot, is the eating disorders or disordered eating. And so people are recommended to go on these diets. Every time you see your doctor, they're probably telling you to lose weight, and you go on, Instagram or TikTok, and you see this, fabulous diet that, is touted to help improve your PCOS, but it's highly restrictive. And, highly restrictive diets will work in the short term, but it's the long-term damage is the thing that we're really looking at. And the disordered eating part of it is huge. We know that women with PCOS experience more disordered eating than women without PCOS. And I think a lot of the mechanism behind that is the fact that we're so focused on weight loss for them. And then it becomes difficult for them to eat normally again. And I think that's really important too. So we have lots of clients that come to us on those very low carb diets, and then we start to put carbohydrates back into their diet in a controlled way that's the right amount for them, and they're astounded that things start to work all of a sudden, and their PCOS symptoms actually do start to resolve, but they come in with this huge fear of eating carbohydrates again. And so we have this sort of fear of certain types of foods. We shouldn't eat rice and we shouldn't eat pasta and all these types of things. Whereas if we eat the right type and the right amounts at the right times, these are all things that can fit into a normal healthy diet as well.
Yeah, I think that point about, that rebound hypothalamic amenorrhea, if we over restrict or we lose too much weight, that can occur at any body weight. Like, people really associate hypothalamic amenorrhea with people who have an eating disorder or who are really low body weights or have very low amounts of body fat. But that's not actually true. And I distinctly remember many years ago, I had a client who this happened to, and she had such a fear of carbohydrates because there was this just overemphasis on it from other healthcare professionals, but not actually ever seeing a dietitian. And when she came to me, she was like, but, I've got some weight loss going, but the period's just not coming back. And I just said to her, I was like, there's no way you'll get a period at, this level of intake that you're having. It's just too low. Your body probably just doesn't feel safe to create a period for you, irrespective of the PCOS at this point. So these two things can coexist. It's not usually either, like, it can be either or, but for a lot of people at any size, a significant restriction, a quick change, a quick fluctuation in body weight especially, or sustained chronic under-eating and or over-exercising can certainly flip you into hypothalamic amenorrhea, which requires, again, kind of that reversing approach like we just talked about, which in theory, like when you think about, oh, just eat more carbs and eat more food, simple. But as we know, working with people psychologically, this is actually extremely challenging because it's all about reorganizing how you think about food and weight and your body and reducing this tie between body weight and PCOS management. And if you're not striving to lose weight, then you've given up on your PCOS management, and that's not the case at all. So, was there anything else you wanted to add around weight management and PCOS, Candice?
Yeah, look, I guess, we've talked a little bit about sort of the carbohydrates being kind of the key with that. And, we're looking at PCOS diets. I guess carbohydrates are the focus, but it's about, eating carbohydrates, eating the right amount for you. And that's really important. But there's other things we're obviously looking at here too. And I think obviously, with PCOS having the underlying inflammation, I think a lot of our anti-inflammatory eating principles are super important for people to consider, even in the weight loss space or regardless of whether you want to lose weight or not. So, we're thinking about, are we eating enough sort of our different coloured veggies and our fruits and legumes and our dairy foods, our nuts and our seeds, our olive oil, our oily fish. So we're looking at all those things that you've probably heard us talk about lots on the podcast. And, all these things are super important for our diets as well. But, we need to look at other factors too. So don't forget about your physical activity and your movement. Don't forget about managing your stress. Don't forget about looking at your sleep, because all of those things also impact those underlying hormones as well. So, we need to address any unhealthy stress. We need to make sure we're looking at, sleep patterns and whether we need to be getting good kind of bedtime routines going for people and those types of things. And I think exercise is super important too. So we're often encouraging, women to start getting involved in exercise. We know the huge benefits of strength training for PCOS as well. And I guess taking the focus off the scales is really important when we're talking about the exercise side of things, because we know when women commence that kind of strength training, they might actually gain some weight, but it comes back to that body composition too. So we're talking about gaining muscle mass and losing body fat as being what we're talking about when it comes to weight loss. And so, your weight on the scales might be the same, but if the composition of your body is changing, that's what's important for your health, and for your cycle regulation. So I think our approach is always going to be not numbers focused on the scales, but it's looking at all the markers that are really important. And that's where I think, we need to go, and we need to normalize that weight loss is really hard for this group. So, the benefits of making these kind of changes, even if your weight doesn't change, is still huge for your health. And that's really important to remember.
Expectation management, reminding of the bigger picture beyond weight, all those things are super, super important. And gosh, we probably need to do a whole separate podcast on sleep, because it's just so
it's huge.
It's so huge. Like, yeah, especially like for our client, like Candice and I have a small caseload of people that have diabetes, both type 1 and type 2. And something that, and Candice has extensive history working in diabetes for many years outside of the dietologist. And I'm sure you can attest to the same, but I recall so many client scenarios where we're struggling with a particular blood glucose level, and we've tried all the right snacks and the right this and the exercise, and we've tried everything. And then one day I just said, just to see if you can sleep 1 hour more. Just sleep 1 hour more and see what happens to that blood glucose level. And I get a message 3 days in a row, I've slept 1 hour more and the blood glucose is in range. Yeah, it's so underrated. And I recall one study that particularly highlighted it to me, which was a healthy cohort, no PCOS, no insulin resistance, just a healthy cohort of people were interrupted once in their sleep at night. Just once they were woken up, they could go right back to sleep. Imagine going to the bathroom or, getting up to let the dog out to use the bathroom or whatever it is. And just that one interruption overnight actually meant that the next day that they were more insulin resistant. So it just goes to show that like how pivotal like sleep really is. And that's just one example. It affects appetite cues and so on. We could talk about it for a whole hour, I would imagine. But it's so important to not just have this food only approach to weight management. I really dislike these popular sayings, particularly I think they probably stem a little bit from the PT community of, it's 80% diet and 20% exercise, or like all these random percentages that don't really come from any kind of information. And for some people,
where's the evidence?
for some people, literally the first thing I get them to work on is their sleep, or I get them to work on their stress, or I get them even before we talk about diet and exercise, because you can see that that's the barrier. If you're feeling really stressed and time poor, then how will you have time to focus on planning a meal or cooking or preparing a meal? You just won't. Or you won't feel like there's enough time to exercise or to get to bed on time. And all these things have domino effects. So you got to kind of find the right starting point for each individual. And that's what we're here to do.
So important. Definitely.
Incredible. Well, thank you so much, Candice, for coming on the podcast today and sharing your incredible knowledge and wisdom and balanced approach to weight management and PCOS. I know this will be a really popular one because anytime the word weight comes into the title of a podcast, the downloads spike. So I know that people will be interested in listening to this one. And if you resonate with how we approach PCOS management, and irrespective of your weight or goals, then we would love to hear from you. Please fill in the quick 2-minute form. The link is always in the show notes for you to work with us. We have bespoke nutrition coaching programs for PCOS, which also includes our online course, the PCOS Project, which is a really bite-sized online course designed to help you manage your PCOS nutrition quite, I hate this word, holistically, but looking beyond just, protein, carbs and fat kind of stuff, and thinking about mental health and inflammation and gut health and looking more broadly. So definitely check that out. And once again, thanks, Candice, for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of Fertility Friendly Food. I hope you found it useful and enjoyable. If you did, don't forget to leave us a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Hit follow on your current podcast streaming platform. I'll wait for you. Go on over, tap your phone screen and hit follow, and share it with a family member, friend, colleague, PCOS bestie. It means the absolute world to us for us to know that we are reaching more of you, and for your incredible feedback. I'm often getting DMs from people saying how much they love the podcast, and I always ask them to leave a review, and surprisingly, almost nobody does. So go on, help break us free from those statistics and leave us a review. Be so grateful for it. Until next time, everyone. Bye. Just quickly, are you currently trying to conceive, or are you on a fertility journey? If so, you can feel like there are 101 things you could or should be doing when it comes to your preconception or fertility health. It's easy to get overwhelmed really quickly. This is exactly why we created our preconception lifestyle checklist. It's 1 page for you and 1 page for your partner, categorized into supplements, diet, lifestyle, and environmental factors, and we focus on the low-hanging fruit. These are simple but effective strategies known to help improve your health and well-being for fertility, and also for a healthy pregnancy and a healthy baby too. Over 5,000 people have downloaded it already. Do you want your free copy too? Head to the link in the show notes now to swipe your free checklist. Okay, let's get into today's episode. Fertility Friendly Food, the podcast, acknowledges the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognises the continuing connections to lands, waters, and community. We pay our respects to First Nation cultures and to the elders past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect to all First Nations people tuning in today. This podcast is recorded on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation.